The cruelest part about being left isn't the goodbye. It's realizing the person who broke your heart sleeps just fine while you're the one crying yourself to sleep. I never thought those words would describe my life until the night Logan Pierce looked me in the eyes across a candlelit table and quietly ended the 3 years we had spent building what I believed would last forever. The restaurant around us continued buzzing with laughter, clinking glasses, and birthday songs from another corner of the room, completely unaware that my entire world had just fallen apart. I stared at the small velvet box hidden inside my jacket pocket, the engagement ring I had spent 6 months saving for, suddenly feeling heavier than anything I had ever carried. Logan didn't even know it was there. He rubbed his forehead and sighed like continuing our relationship had become another exhausting item on his schedule. "You're a good person, Ethan," he said softly, "but I don't think we're right for each other anymore." Those words sounded strangely polite, almost rehearsed, and somehow that hurt more than if he had shouted. I searched his face for hesitation, regret, anything that suggested this was just another argument we could survive together. Instead, I found calm acceptance. He had already moved on long before tonight. I just hadn't noticed. I wanted to ask what I had done wrong. Was I too emotional? Too predictable? Had loving him too completely somehow become a burden? But every question felt smaller than the silence growing between us. Logan placed a few bills on the table, stood up, and offered a faint smile that belonged to a stranger instead of the man who used to kiss my forehead every Sunday morning before making pancakes. "Take care of yourself," he said before walking away without looking back. I stayed frozen until the waiter quietly cleared our untouched dinner plates. When I finally stepped outside, the cool spring rain had already covered the sidewalks. I didn't bother opening my umbrella. The water blurred the city lights into colorful streaks while tears blurred everything else. I kept walking without knowing where I was going, passing closed bookstores, glowing diners, and apartment windows where ordinary people were finishing ordinary evenings with the people they loved. My phone remained silent. No apology. No message asking if I had gotten home safely. Nothing. By the time I reached the old brick buildings near Riverside Park, my shoes were soaked and my hands were trembling from the cold. I sat on a bench beneath a dying street lamp and finally let myself cry without trying to hide it. Maybe love wasn't supposed to end like this. Maybe forever had simply been a word I wanted to believe in more than Logan ever did. I pulled the velvet box from my pocket and opened it for the first time that night. The diamond reflected the pale streetlight, beautiful, hopeful, and completely useless. I laughed once through my tears because it felt ridiculous that something so small could represent every dream I had just lost. Then, through the steady rhythm of the rain, another shadow stopped a few feet away. Someone quietly held an umbrella over me without saying a single word, and for the first time that terrible night, the rain was no longer falling directly on my shoulders. The man holding the umbrella looked about my age, maybe a little older, with dark brown hair damp from the rain and kind hazel eyes that carried quiet concern instead of curiosity. He did not ask whether I was all right, because both of us knew the answer. Instead, he slowly removed his charcoal gray coat and draped it over my shoulders before sitting on the opposite end of the bench, leaving enough space to respect the invisible walls grief always builds around a broken heart. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The city filled the silence for us with distant traffic, the occasional subway rumbling beneath the streets, and rain tapping softly against the umbrella above our heads. Finally, he smiled, almost apologetically. "I know this probably sounds strange, but I am Caleb." His voice was warm, without trying to be comforting. It sounded like someone who understood that pain did not disappear because another person offered encouraging words. "Ethan," I answered quietly, surprised my voice still worked. Caleb nodded as if my name alone was enough. "Information for the moment. Would it bother you if I stayed here until the rain lets up?" I looked around the nearly empty park and shrugged. "I guess not." Another silence settled between us, but this one felt different. It was not awkward. It was peaceful. After a while, Caleb reached into a paper bag resting beside his feet and pulled out 2 cups with cardboard sleeves. "I stopped at a coffee shop on my way home," he said with a small laugh. "One is black coffee. The other is hot chocolate. I had a feeling someone might need one of them tonight." He held out the hot chocolate without insisting. I accepted it with both hands, grateful for the warmth spreading through my cold fingers. "Thank you," I whispered. "You are welcome." He looked toward the rain instead of at me. You do not have to tell me what happened. That simple sentence almost made me cry again because everyone else always wanted an explanation before offering kindness. Caleb expected nothing. We sat there sipping warm drinks while strangers hurried past beneath umbrellas of every color imaginable. Eventually, I laughed softly at myself. I was supposed to celebrate something tonight. Caleb glanced over. Did it not go as planned? I shook my head and managed a bittersweet smile. Not exactly. He nodded once, accepting the answer without pressing further. Life has strange timing, he said. Sometimes the worst night of your life quietly introduces you to the people you will someday be thankful you met. I looked at him with tired eyes, unsure whether to believe that was possible. My heart still belonged to someone who had walked away less than an hour earlier. The future felt impossible to imagine. When the rain finally became a gentle drizzle, Caleb stood and offered his hand, not to pull me up, but simply to help if I wanted it. I hesitated before placing my hand in his. His grip was steady, careful, and reassuring. We walked toward the parking lot together where an aging blue pickup truck waited beneath flickering lights. Before climbing inside, Caleb reached into his wallet and handed me a neatly folded business card. It read, Caleb Hart, Heart Veterinary Clinic. On the back he had written a single sentence with a black pen. You do not have to carry heavy days by yourself. Then he smiled one last time, wished me a safe trip home, and drove away, leaving me standing there with a cup of cooling hot chocolate, a business card in my pocket, and the unfamiliar feeling that maybe complete strangers could sometimes leave deeper impressions than people who once promised forever. 6 months passed quietly, not because life suddenly became easy, but because healing rarely arrived with fireworks. It came in ordinary mornings when I realized I had slept through the night without dreaming about Logan. It came in grocery stores where I no longer reached for his favorite cereal before remembering he was gone. It came in peaceful Sunday afternoons when I found myself reading in the park instead of staring at old photographs I could never bring myself to delete. The business card Caleb had given me stayed tucked inside my wallet the entire time. I never planned to keep it. Somehow I simply never threw it away. Every now and then I would catch a glimpse of the handwritten sentence on the back and smile, without fully understanding why. One Saturday afternoon, my neighbor knocked on my apartment door holding a frightened golden retriever puppy wrapped in a blanket. She explained that the little dog had been limping after slipping while chasing squirrels and asked if I knew any veterinarian who accepted weekend appointments. Without thinking, I reached for my wallet. A few minutes later, I found myself driving across town toward Heart Veterinary Clinic. The building was modest, surrounded by flowering trees and a white wooden fence that looked more welcoming than professional. The waiting room smelled faintly of fresh coffee and clean towels instead of harsh disinfectant. Framed photographs of rescued animals covered one wall, each one capturing a second chance instead of perfection. While I filled out paperwork for my neighbor, I heard a familiar voice laughing gently somewhere down the hallway. I looked up just as Caleb stepped into the reception area carrying a sleepy orange cat in his arms. He noticed me immediately, and genuine surprise brightened his face. Ethan, he asked with an easy smile that felt exactly the same as it had beneath the umbrella months earlier. I was beginning to think I imagined meeting you in the rain. I laughed before I realized I was doing it. I could say the same thing. Caleb introduced himself to my neighbor first, kneeling to reassure the nervous puppy before examining its injured paw with calm, practiced movements. He spoke softly to the little dog the entire time as though animals understood every word, and somehow they probably did. After wrapping the paw with a small bandage, he explained everything patiently without rushing or using complicated medical language. Watching him work revealed something I had not seen that rainy night. Kindness was not something Caleb performed when people were watching. It was simply the way he existed. As my neighbor thanked him repeatedly, Caleb glanced toward me. I am about to take my lunch break, he said. There is a diner 2 blocks away that makes dangerously good blueberry pancakes. Would you like to join me? I hesitated out of habit rather than uncertainty. 6 months earlier, I would have worried that accepting lunch might somehow betray the memories I still carried. Now the feeling was different. It was not guilt holding me back. It was simply unfamiliar hope. Caleb noticed my hesitation and smiled reassuringly. Just lunch, he said. No expectations. No pressure. 2 people sharing pancakes is allowed to stay exactly that. I laughed again, louder this time, surprising both of us. As we walked toward the diner beneath a bright autumn sky, I realized something so small that it almost escaped me. For the first time since my heart had been broken, I was looking forward to the next hour instead of mourning the last 6 months. By the time October arrived, lunch at the little diner had quietly turned into a comfortable routine neither of us ever officially planned. Some weeks we met on Tuesdays after Caleb finished his morning appointments. Other times it was Saturday afternoons after I visited the local farmer's market. We talked about everything except the subjects that had once defined our lives. Caleb told me funny stories about stubborn rescue dogs who refused to leave their blankets, dramatic parrots that insulted everyone except their owners, and an elderly turtle that somehow escaped its enclosure twice in the same week. I shared stories about my work as a graphic designer, impossible deadlines, and the strange satisfaction of watching a blank screen slowly become something beautiful. Somewhere between blueberry pancakes, coffee refills, and long walks through Riverside Park, I realized I no longer checked my phone hoping Logan would appear. His absence had stopped feeling like an open wound and started feeling like an old scar that occasionally ached when the weather changed. One Friday evening, my coworker convinced me to attend a downtown art exhibition featuring local painters and photographers. Caleb agreed to come after closing the clinic early, arriving in a navy sweater that somehow made him look both relaxed and effortlessly confident. "I should warn you," he joked as we entered the gallery. "I understand dogs much better than abstract art." I laughed. "That makes two of us." Soft jazz drifted through the spacious room while guests wandered between colorful canvases holding sparkling water and small desserts. The atmosphere felt light, peaceful, and surprisingly familiar. Caleb paused in front of a landscape painting, tilting his head thoughtfully. "I have absolutely no idea what the artist meant," he admitted. "But it reminds me that sunsets never apologize for ending." I looked at him, smiling. "You always say things that sound simple until I spend 3 days thinking about them." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck with quiet embarrassment. Before he could answer, I sensed someone watching me. It was not a sound or a movement. It was the strange feeling that certain memories never truly disappear. I turned toward the opposite side of the gallery and immediately froze. Logan stood beside a display of black and white photographs, dressed in the same polished style I remembered, except something about him seemed different. He looked surprised, almost unsettled. His eyes stayed fixed on me as though he had expected to find the version of Ethan who cried alone in the rain instead of the one laughing beside someone else. Time seemed to hesitate between us. Neither of us moved for several seconds. Caleb followed my gaze before quietly asking, "Someone you know?" I took a slow breath. Months earlier, simply hearing Logan's name would have stolen every bit of air from my lungs. Now my heartbeat remained steady. "Yes," I answered honestly. "Someone from another chapter of my life." Logan finally started walking toward us, his expression shifting from disbelief to uncertainty with every step. His confident smile was gone, replaced by something I had never seen on his face before: regret. When he stopped a few feet away, his eyes flickered from me to Caleb and back again. "Ethan," he said quietly, almost as though he was afraid saying my name too loudly might make this moment disappear. You look happy." For the first time since the night everything ended, I realized he was the one searching my face for answers, and I was no longer the person waiting for his. Logan opened his mouth as though he had rehearsed a dozen different conversations, but forgotten every single one the moment he reached me. The crowded gallery suddenly felt strangely quiet, even with soft music drifting through the room and guests continuing to admire the artwork around us. "It has been a long time," he finally said. I nodded politely. "It has." The simplicity of the exchange surprised even me. There had been a time when hearing his voice would have unraveled every bit of progress I had fought so hard to build. Now it sounded like a familiar song from another season of my life. Caleb stood beside me without interrupting, his posture relaxed, giving me all the space I needed to handle the moment myself. Logan glanced toward him again. "Are you two here together?" The question carried more emotion than the words themselves. I looked at Caleb before answering with an honest smile. "Yes, we came together." Something shifted behind Logan's eyes. It was small, almost invisible, but unmistakable. The confidence I remembered had been replaced by uncertainty. He looked at Caleb the way people look at someone who unexpectedly occupies a place they once assumed would always remain empty. Caleb extended his hand with effortless courtesy. I am Caleb Hart. It is nice to meet you. Logan accepted the handshake, though his smile never quite reached his eyes. Logan Pierce. The introduction lasted only seconds, yet it somehow carried the weight of years. After an awkward silence, Logan cleared his throat. Ethan, would you mind if we talked for a minute? Just the two of us. Before I could respond, Caleb gently touched my elbow. I'm going to look at the photography exhibit down the hall. Take your time. There was no jealousy in his voice. No possessiveness. Only trust. As Caleb walked away, I realized how different that felt from the relationship I once believed was love. Logan watched him disappear into the next room before turning back toward me. You seem different, he admitted quietly. You laugh more. I smiled faintly. People change. He lowered his eyes for a moment. I did not expect to see you tonight. Neither did I. Another silence settled between us. This one was heavier. Logan slowly exhaled. After we broke up, I kept telling myself it was the right decision. I thought we both needed different lives. He paused before continuing. But then I saw you tonight. He shook his head almost in disbelief. You looked genuinely happy. I listened without interrupting. Months ago, I would have searched every word for hope that he still loved me. Now I simply heard a man trying to understand the consequences of his own choices. I spent a long time thinking happiness depended on someone choosing me, I said calmly. Eventually I realized I had to choose myself first. Logan looked away toward one of the paintings hanging nearby, his reflection faintly visible in the glass protecting the canvas. I made a mistake, Ethan. His voice cracked just enough for me to notice. I thought I had more time. I thought if I ever wanted us back together, you would still be waiting. His confession hung quietly between us. I felt sadness, but not because I wanted to return to the past. I felt sad because I finally understood that regret always arrives after opportunity has already walked away. Across the gallery, Caleb happened to glance in our direction. The moment our eyes met, he smiled with the same quiet warmth he had offered beneath that umbrella months earlier. Without saying a single word, he reminded me of something Logan never could. The right person never makes you wonder whether you are worth staying for. The drive home from the gallery was quieter than I expected, but it was not uncomfortable. Streetlights slid across the windshield in warm golden streaks, while soft music played through Caleb's truck at barely more than a whisper. Neither of us seemed eager to fill the silence, simply because silence no longer frightened us. When we stopped at a red light, Caleb glanced over with a gentle smile. You do not have to explain anything tonight. I looked out the passenger window, watching people laugh outside a neighborhood bakery that was preparing to close. Thank you, I said quietly. For what? For letting me have that conversation without trying to rescue me. Caleb rested one hand lightly on the steering wheel. You did not need rescuing. You handled it exactly the way you wanted to. His answer settled somewhere deep inside me because it reminded me how different respect felt from control. The following week, life returned to its familiar rhythm. I buried myself in client meetings while Caleb spent long days caring for nervous pets and reassuring anxious families. We exchanged short messages during lunch breaks, usually about ordinary things. A stubborn bulldog who refused to leave the examination table. A logo design that finally came together after hours of frustration. Small moments that slowly stitched themselves into something meaningful. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, my office receptionist appeared beside my desk, holding a small white envelope. Someone dropped this off for you, she said. There was no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. Ethan, I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I cannot stop thinking about what I said at the gallery. Please let me buy you coffee. Just once. Logan. I stared at the neat handwriting for several minutes before folding the paper and slipping it back into the envelope. That evening I showed it to Caleb while we shared dinner at my apartment. He read the note, placed it back on the table, and quietly took another bite of pasta without offering an opinion. I laughed softly. You are really not going to tell me what to do? Caleb smiled. If I tell you what choice to make, then it stops being your choice. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. You know, most people would be worried. I am human, he admitted. Of course I have worries. He folded his hands together. But trust is believing someone can stand at a crossroads without pushing them toward the direction you prefer. His words lingered long after dinner ended. 2 days later, I agreed to meet Logan for coffee, not because I wanted another chance, but because unanswered conversations have a way of echoing forever. Caleb simply wished me a good afternoon before heading back to the clinic. "Call me afterward if you feel like talking," he said. "Or do not. Either way, I hope you find peace." Saturday arrived bright and cool. The little coffee shop overlooked the river where joggers passed beneath colorful autumn trees. Logan was already waiting when I walked in. He stood immediately, looking both hopeful and nervous. As I approached the table, I noticed he had ordered my favorite cinnamon latte from years ago. Once, that small gesture would have convinced me he still knew my heart better than anyone else. Now it simply reminded me how much both of us had changed. I thanked him for the drink and sat across from him with a calmness I never imagined possible. Logan searched my face for the version of Ethan who would forgive him before he even apologized. Instead, he found someone who had finally learned that healing does not mean forgetting the past. It means no longer allowing the past to decide your future. Logan wrapped both hands around his untouched coffee cup as though the warmth might somehow steady everything he wanted to say. For several moments, he simply watched people strolling along the river outside the cafe windows, searching for words that refused to arrive easily. Finally, he looked back at me with a tired smile. "I have replayed that night in my head more times than I can count," he admitted. "At first I convinced myself I did the right thing. I kept telling everyone that we wanted different futures. It sounded reasonable every time I said it out loud." He lowered his eyes. "The strange thing about lies is that eventually even the person telling them stops believing them." I remained quiet, letting him continue. There was no anger left inside me, only curiosity about the journey that had brought him here. Logan reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and carefully placed a folded photograph on the table between us. It was an old picture from a weekend trip we had taken to the mountains during our second year together. We were both laughing, wind blowing through our hair, completely unaware that memories could someday become heavier than the moments themselves. "I never threw this away," he whispered. I could not. I studied the photograph before gently sliding it back toward him. "Some memories deserve to stay memories," I said softly. Logan nodded, blinking several times before speaking again. "There is something I have to ask." His voice grew quieter. "Were you already seeing Caleb when we met at the gallery?" I smiled faintly. "No. We met months after we broke up." Relief briefly crossed his face before disappearing just as quickly. "Then maybe." He stopped himself, realizing hope alone could not rewrite history. I reached into my messenger bag and hesitated for only a second before removing the small velvet box that had remained there ever since the night everything ended. I had carried it for months without opening it again. Slowly, I placed it on the table. Logan stared at it without understanding. "Do you remember our anniversary dinner?" I asked. His expression changed immediately. "Of course I do." I pushed the box toward him. "Go ahead." His hands trembled as he opened the lid. The diamond caught the afternoon sunlight pouring through the cafe window, sending tiny reflections across the wooden table. Logan froze. Every bit of color slowly disappeared from his face. He looked at the ring, then back at me, unable to speak. I gave him the gentle truth he had never known. "I was going to ask you to marry me that night." The silence that followed felt endless. Logan covered his mouth with one hand as tears gathered in his eyes. "Ethan." His voice broke completely. "I did not know." I nodded. "I know." He closed the box carefully, as though it contained something far more fragile than gold and stone. "If I had stayed 5 more minutes," he whispered. "If I had listened." I offered him a sad but peaceful smile. Life is full of moments that only make sense after they are gone. Logan looked at me with more regret than I had ever imagined one person could carry. "I loved you," he said quietly. "Maybe I still do." I believed him. That was the surprising part. I believed every word. But love that arrives after someone has already walked away carries a different weight than love that chooses to stay. As I slipped the velvet box back into my bag, I realized I no longer carried it as a symbol of a future that never happened. I carried it as proof that I had once loved someone with my whole heart, and surviving that loss had quietly taught me how to recognize the person who would never make me wonder whether I was worth choosing in the first place. When we stepped outside the cafe, the afternoon sun hung low above the river, painting the water with streaks of gold that reminded me how quietly endings could resemble beginnings. Logan walked beside me in silence until we reached the sidewalk overlooking the park, where children chased fallen leaves and elderly couples shared benches as though time itself had slowed down for them. He finally stopped walking. "Ethan," he said, his voice barely louder than the breeze. "I am not asking you to forget what happened. I know I do not deserve that. I am asking if there is any chance at all that we could start over." I looked at him for a long moment. Months ago, hearing those words would have felt like a miracle. I had imagined countless versions of this conversation while lying awake at night, convincing myself that if Logan ever came back, I would never let him leave again. But life had quietly changed me while I was busy surviving. "Do you know what I kept asking myself after we broke up?" I said. Logan slowly shook his head. "Every morning I wondered why I was never enough. I replayed every conversation, every mistake, every ordinary day, trying to figure out which version of myself made you decide to walk away. I spent months believing love had to be earned." Logan lowered his eyes, unable to interrupt. Then one rainy night, a complete stranger shared an umbrella with me without asking me to explain why I was crying. He stayed because he wanted to, not because I convinced him to. That simple kindness changed something inside me. Logan swallowed hard. "I wish I had been that person." "I know," I answered gently. "But wishing cannot rewrite yesterday." Tears finally escaped down his cheeks. He did not hide them. "I love you, Ethan," he whispered. "I know I realized it too late, but I do. If you gave me one more chance, I would spend the rest of my life proving it." His honesty was real. I could hear it in every word. That truth made saying goodbye even more difficult. I felt tears gathering in my own eyes, not because I wanted to return, but because loving someone does not erase compassion when they hurt. "There was a time when I would have waited forever to hear you say that," I admitted. "But the person who needed those words does not exist anymore." Logan closed his eyes for a moment as though accepting a painful truth he had been avoiding for far too long. "So this is really goodbye?" I nodded slowly. "No, this is thank you." He looked confused. I smiled through my tears. "Thank you for loving me when you could. Thank you for teaching me what I needed to grow beyond. And thank you for leaving, because if you had not, I never would have discovered that real love is not something you spend every day trying to deserve." We stood there quietly until a familiar blue pickup truck pulled into a nearby parking space. Caleb stepped out carrying a paper bag from the bakery across the street, clearly unaware he had arrived in the middle of the final chapter of a story that no longer belonged to him. He noticed us immediately, but did not rush over. Instead, he offered me the same calm, patient smile that had first appeared beneath an umbrella on the worst night of my life. I smiled back without hesitation. And in that simple exchange, I realized that choosing peace was never about rejecting the past. It was about finally walking toward the future without asking anyone's permission. Caleb waited until Logan quietly walked away before crossing the sidewalk toward me, the small paper bag still warm in his hands. He did not ask what had been said. He did not study my face for clues or search my eyes for answers I was not ready to give. Instead, he held out the bag with a sheepish smile. "I bought the blueberry muffins before they sold out," he said. I figured that counted as responsible planning. I laughed through the last of my tears, accepting the bag with both hands. That might be the best decision anyone has made all day. Caleb smiled, relieved to hear me laugh again. "Would you like to walk for a while?" We followed the riverside path as the afternoon slowly melted into evening. Fallen leaves drifted across the pavement while families packed picnic blankets and children raced one another toward the playground. Everything around us felt wonderfully ordinary, and for the first time in a long time, ordinary felt like a gift instead of something to escape. After several minutes, I stopped beside the same river where I had once imagined my future ending every time I remembered the past. "I met Logan for closure," I said quietly. "Did you find it?" Caleb asked. I looked across the water, watching the sunset turn the gentle waves into ribbons of gold. "I think I realized closure is not something another person gives you. It is something you decide to carry home yourself." Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds like something worth keeping." I reached into my bag and removed the velvet ring box one final time. Caleb looked at it, but said nothing. Slowly I opened it, smiled at the ring that had once represented a future that never arrived, then closed the lid again. "I used to think this box was a reminder of everything I lost," I admitted. "Now I think it reminds me that my heart survived loving someone completely. That is nothing to be ashamed of." Caleb looked at me with quiet admiration. You have become much kinder to yourself. His words settled gently inside me because they were true. Healing had not erased my memories. It had simply taught me that memories no longer deserve to control tomorrow. I took one last look at the ring before placing the box into a donation envelope addressed to a local charity auction that raised money for homeless youth. I smiled as I sealed it. Some symbols deserved a new purpose instead of another hiding place. Caleb watched the envelope disappear into the nearby mailbox without saying a word. When I turned back toward him, he held out his hand, not as a grand declaration, not as a promise wrapped in impossible perfection, but as a simple invitation. I slipped my hand into his, and he gently intertwined our fingers. Where would you like to go now? He asked. I looked ahead at the long riverside path stretching beneath the glowing streetlights, realizing I no longer felt afraid of whatever waited beyond the next corner. Forward, I answered with a smile that reached every part of me. I think I have spent enough time looking back. Caleb squeezed my hand once before we continued walking together, our footsteps falling into the same quiet rhythm as the evening breeze carried the scent of autumn through the trees. Behind us, the past finally became nothing more than another road we had already traveled. Ahead of us, the future asked for nothing except one step at a time, and for the first time in years, that was more than enough.